kill me now. Kill me now, you go to jail.
Did you plan to kill your mom?
We dumped it in a big, huge trash can. We said we just want to go to school and act like we just missed the bus.
Your mom's got approximately 60 plus either cuts or stabs. Why weren't you or Taz cut more?
I would definitely give my life for her.
The bathroom floor was slick with blood, 60 stab wounds, a mother's throat nearly severed, and the killers. Her own 16-year-old twin daughters, who calmly called 911, tears on command, a performance they'd practiced for hours. What transforms the sacred bond between sisters, meant for protection, companionship, and unconditional love, into something monstrous? What happens when the hands that should hold yours instead grip knives, hammers, and guns? When whispered secrets become murder plots? Today we're diving into the darkest corners of sisterhood, where blood ties become bloodshed, where shared bedrooms become crime scenes, and where the people who know you best use that knowledge to kill. Sisters who kill together represent one of criminology's most disturbing phenomena. Unlike solo killers, they reinforce each other's darkest impulses, creating a psychological echo chamber where morality warps and violence becomes not just possible but inevitable. They share a language no one else understands. They validate each other's rage, and when they strike, they do so with the terrifying efficiency that comes from lifelong intimacy. From the Whitehead twins of Georgia who butchered their mother in a bathtub, to the DeFrancisco sisters who executed a boyfriend and set his body ablaze, to the Eriksson twins whose shared psychosis led to highway carnage, to the Khachaturyan sisters who finally fought back against unimaginable abuse. These cases reveal how the closest human bonds can fracture in the most catastrophic ways. Before we continue, if you're fascinated by the psychology behind true crime cases like these, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This channel dives deep into the minds of killers, and I don't want you to miss a single story. And if you're already part of our true crime community, thank you. Drop a like on this video to help others find it. I'm curious, where are you watching from today? Let me know in the comments below. Your perspective might be different depending on where you are in the world, and I'd love to hear your thoughts as we explore these cases together. Now, let's begin our journey with the Whitehead twins, a case that shocked a quiet Georgia suburb and left investigators wondering how two teenage girls could commit such a savage act against the woman who gave them life. Conyers, Georgia sits just 24 miles east of Atlanta, close enough to feel the city's pulse, yet far enough to maintain its small-town character. Tree-lined streets, modest homes, and a sense of community that makes neighbors feel like family. It's the kind of place where people move to raise children away from urban chaos, where folks still wave from porches and check in when something seems off. In this seemingly idyllic setting, 34-year-old Nikki Whitehead was doing what millions of single mothers do every day, working tirelessly to provide for her family. She pulled late-night shifts at a local manufacturing plant, often returning home exhausted, only to wake up hours later to drive her 16-year-old twin daughters, Jasmia and Tasmia, to school. Friends described Nikki as devoted, determined, and protective, perhaps too protective in the eyes of her increasingly rebellious daughters. She wanted those girls to have opportunities she never had, recalled a co-worker. College, careers, stability. She was strict because she loved them. But beneath the surface of this hard-working family, dangerous currents were swirling. School counselors had documented concerning behavior from both twins, mood swings more extreme than typical teenage angst, sudden academic decline, and occasional aggressive outbursts toward teachers and peers. The girls, once inseparable and supportive of each other, had begun to isolate themselves from other students, creating an impenetrable psychological bubble where they reinforced each other's grievances. 2 years before the murder, social services had received a complaint about possible neglect in the Whitehead home. The investigation was brief, inconclusive, and ultimately abandoned, a missed opportunity that would later haunt local authorities. Meanwhile, neighbors reported hearing increasingly heated arguments between Nikki and her daughters in the weeks leading up to January 2010. The twins resented their mother's rules, her curfews, her insistence on knowing their whereabouts. What appeared to outsiders as normal parental concern felt to the twins like suffocating control. Looking back, we all saw the warning signs, a neighbor later told reporters. But who could imagine it would end like this? On January 13, 2010, at approximately 3:15 p.m., emergency dispatchers received a frantic call from the Whitehead residence. One of the twins, voice breaking with apparent grief, reported finding their mother unresponsive in the bathroom. First responders arrived within minutes to a scene that would haunt them for years to come. Nikki Whitehead lay in a massive pool of blood, her body bearing more than 60 stab wounds. Her throat had been slashed with such force that she was nearly decapitated. The bathroom walls were splattered with blood, indicating a frenzied, prolonged attack. A kitchen knife, its handle wiped clean, but its blade still coated with drying blood, lay discarded on the tile floor. The bathtub rim was smeared with crimson handprints, suggesting an attempt to clean up the scene. Outside, the twins huddled together on the front lawn, tears streaming down their faces as they spoke to officers. They claimed they'd returned from school to find their mother already dead, a victim, they suggested, of a home invasion, or perhaps a vengeful ex-boyfriend. "We just want to know who did this to our mum," Tasmia told a local news crew that evening, her sister nodding solemnly beside her. But detectives quickly noted troubling inconsistencies. Despite claiming to have spent hours at the crime scene before calling 911, neither girl showed signs of hypothermia that would be expected in the January cold. The bathtub water temperature indicated recent use, contradicting their timeline. Most damning of all, forensic technicians discovered traces of Nikki's blood under both girls' fingernails, and fingerprint analysis matched both twins to the murder weapon. As investigators observed the twins during questioning, they noticed something chilling. The girls seemed to take turns displaying grief. When one would begin to tire of crying for the cameras, the other would seamlessly take over, maintaining a performance of mourning while her sister rested. Their accounts of discovering the body were identical, suspiciously so as if rehearsed. The case broke open when investigators confronted Tasmia with evidence of blood spatter on her sweatshirt that matched the pattern on the bathtub rim. Her composure cracked, and the horrifying truth emerged. What had begun as a morning argument over household chores and school attendance had escalated into physical confrontation. When Nikki pushed Tasmia, both twins attacked with kitchen knives, stabbing their mother repeatedly. They dragged her to the bathtub, attempting to wash away evidence before staging the scene to suggest an outside intruder. Psychological evaluations revealed a disturbing dynamic between the twins, a reinforcing cycle of shared resentment that criminologists call emotional contagion. Each sister validated and amplified the other's anger, creating a feedback loop that ultimately erupted in violence. Neither girl alone might have crossed that threshold, but together they created a third psychological entity, a shared identity capable of unspeakable brutality. In these rare cases of sibling-perpetrated parricide, we often see what's called diffusion of responsibility, explained Dr. Catherine Ramsland, a forensic psychologist who later studied the case. Each participant feels less individual guilt because the act was shared. It's as if they're thinking, "I'm only half responsible for this." In Butts County Superior Court, facing charges of malice murder and aggravated assault, the Whitehead twins ultimately entered negotiated guilty pleas to voluntary manslaughter. Prosecutors emphasized the premeditated nature of the attack, pointing to evidence that the girls had wrapped tarps around their bedroom floor the night before, suggesting they had contemplated violence. Text messages between the twins revealed growing hatred toward their mother, with one message reading, "She won't control us much longer." The defense argued that the twins, despite their horrific actions, lacked adult capacity for foresight and impulse control. Brain development research suggests the prefrontal cortex, responsible for judgment and decision-making, isn't fully formed until the mid-20s, a fact their attorneys emphasized repeatedly. The judge, acknowledging both the brutality of the crime and the defendant's youth, imposed concurrent 30-year sentences with parole eligibility after 25 years. Parricide among adolescents is mercifully rare, he noted during sentencing, but when it occurs, it demands severe accountability. The twins were separated and sent to different youth correctional facilities, where psychological evaluations indicated emerging antisocial traits and shared borderline personality symptoms, conditions that might have been treatable had they been identified earlier. Today, Jasmaya and Tasmaya Whitehead remain incarcerated, their case a stark reminder of how quickly family bonds can dissolve into violence. Their story has become a cautionary tale in criminology textbooks, cited as an example of how adolescent rebellion, when combined with psychological reinforcement between siblings, can escalate to the ultimate betrayal. Before we move on to our next case, I'm curious, what time is it where you're watching? Drop it in the comments below. It's fascinating to think about how this community spans different time zones, with some of you watching in broad daylight and others deep into the night. Speaking of night, our next case takes us to Chicago's South Side, where darkness fell on more than just the city when the DeFrancisco sisters decided that a boyfriend had become a liability. Chicago's South Side tells a tale of two cities within one metropolis. While downtown skyscrapers gleam against Lake Michigan, neighborhoods like the one where Regina and Margaret DeFrancisco grew up struggle with systemic poverty, underfunded schools, and the constant threat of gang violence. Abandoned storefronts stand as silent witnesses to economic decline, while police sirens provide the soundtrack to daily life. It's a place where opportunity feels as distant as the downtown skyline visible on clear days, close enough to see yet impossibly far to reach. In this unforgiving landscape, the DeFrancisco sisters navigated childhood without a safety net. Their mother worked double and sometimes triple shifts as a home health aide, often leaving before dawn and returning well after midnight. Their father drifted in and out of their lives between prison sentences for drug offenses and petty theft. The apartment they called home was small but clean, their mother's desperate attempt to maintain dignity amid deteriorating circumstances. Those girls raised themselves, a neighbor would later tell investigators. Their mama was working herself to death to keep food on the table, but kids need more than food. School records painted a troubling picture. Regina, the older sister at 19, had dropped out after repeated truancy. Margaret, 17, remained enrolled but rarely attended classes. Both displayed what teachers described as impulsive decision-making and difficulty with authority figures. Without consistent adult guidance, they became each other's primary influence, a dangerous dynamic when neither had developed healthy coping mechanisms or moral boundaries. Into this volatile situation came Oscar Velasquez, a 22-year-old with dreams bigger than his circumstances. An aspiring musician who worked days at an auto body shop, Oscar saw potential in his own talent and in Regina DeFrancisco. Friends described him as charismatic and generous, often spending his modest earnings on gifts for Regina. A silver necklace, designer sneakers, even a used keyboard so she could learn to play alongside him. He thought he could save her, his cousin later recalled. He was always trying to get her to enroll in GED classes, talking about how they could build something together. But the relationship quickly soured. Oscar introduced Regina to a social circle that included recreational drug use and all-night parties. What began as weekend fun evolved into daily habits, with Regina frequently borrowing money she never repaid. Meanwhile, Margaret watched from the sidelines, increasingly resentful of Oscar's influence over her sister and jealous of the attention Regina received. By June 2000, Oscar had grown weary of Regina's demands and erratic behavior. After lending her $600, money he'd saved for studio time, he discovered she had no intention of repaying him. When he confronted her, Regina promised to meet and discuss repayment. It was the last promise she would ever make to him. On that humid summer evening, surveillance footage from a corner bodega captured Oscar's final moments of freedom, walking confidently toward the DeFrancisco apartment, unaware that he was walking into a trap. Inside, the sisters had already formulated their plan. Text messages recovered later revealed their chilling preparation. "Bring him upstairs. I'll be waiting in the bedroom." When Oscar entered the apartment expecting reconciliation, Margaret emerged from the bedroom with their father's .25 caliber handgun, a weapon that should have been in police evidence lockup after a prior confiscation. She fired a single shot at point-blank range, striking Oscar in the neck and severing his spinal cord. He died instantly, his body crumpling to the floor as Regina watched. Working with the efficiency of those who had planned carefully, the sisters wrapped Oscar's body in a tarpaulin they had purchased that morning. They dragged him down the back stairs and loaded him into the trunk of a stolen sedan parked in the alley behind their building. Driving to a vacant lot several miles away, they doused the tarp-wrapped body with lighter fluid and set it ablaze, hoping to destroy any evidence linking them to the murder. Their plan might have succeeded, if not for a passing motorist who noticed the unusual fire and called 911. Chicago firefighters quickly extinguished the flames, discovering Oscar's partially burned remains. The medical examiner would later determine that the gunshot, not the fire, had caused death, a crucial detail that elevated the charges to first-degree murder. If you're finding this case as disturbing as I do, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue bringing these important stories to light, examining the psychology behind these crimes, and perhaps helping us all recognize warning signs before tragedy strikes. And if you're already subscribed, thank you. Consider sharing this video with someone who appreciates in-depth true crime analysis. Back at the crime scene, investigators pieced together the sisters' movements through forensic evidence. Tire tread impressions matched the stolen sedan, which the sisters had attempted to hide under a tarp in the alley. Paint scrapings on the car's bumper contained traces of Oscar's DNA. Most damning of all, ballistics testing matched the bullet recovered from Oscar's body to a weapon registered to the DeFrancisco family, a gun that should have been in police custody following a prior domestic incident. With evidence mounting, Chicago police launched a citywide manhunt for the DeFrancisco sisters, who had vanished immediately after the murder. Their photographs appeared on local news broadcasts, in newspapers, and on flyers posted throughout the South Side. Despite the publicity, the sisters managed to evade capture, slipping out of Illinois and beginning a cross-country journey that would last more than 2 years. Their flight took them through Indiana, Missouri, and eventually to Kansas City, where they adopted stolen identities and found work at a local restaurant. They might have remained hidden longer if not for their predictable patterns. They continued contacting family members, used recognizable aliases, and frequented the same establishments repeatedly. These behaviors eventually narrowed investigators' search radius. The case gained national attention when America's Most Wanted featured the sisters in a 2002 episode, complete with age-progressed renderings that accounted for their changed appearances. Within weeks of the broadcast, tips flooded in from viewers across the Midwest. One particularly credible report placed them at a suburban motel in Wichita, Kansas. Federal marshals surrounded the motel on a crisp October morning, apprehending both sisters without incident. Margaret was found with a loaded handgun in her purse, evidence, prosecutors would later argue, of her continued danger to society. Extradited to Cook County, Illinois, both sisters maintained their innocence, pleading not guilty to all charges. The trial revealed the calculated nature of the murder. Prosecutors presented text messages between the sisters discussing their plan, receipts for the tarpaulin and lighter fluid purchased hours before Oscar's arrival, and testimony from neighbors who had overheard Regina luring Oscar to the apartment with promises of repayment. The defense attempted to portray the sisters as victims of their environment, young women who had never received proper guidance or support, who had acted out of fear rather than malice. They grew up in a war zone, their attorney argued. They never learned how to resolve conflicts any other way. The jury remained unconvinced. After deliberating for less than 6 hours, they returned guilty verdicts for both sisters on charges of first-degree murder and concealment of a homicidal death. The judge, noting the premeditated nature of the crime and the sisters' lack of remorse, sentenced Regina to 50 years in prison. Margaret, as the shooter, received 60 years, effectively a life sentence in the Illinois correctional system. The DeFrancisco case sparked intense debate about media portrayal of female offenders, particularly sisters who kill. While male killers are often analyzed through the lens of psychology or sociology, the DeFrancisco sisters found themselves sensationalized in tabloids and true crime shows that emphasized their appearance and the shocking nature of women committing violent crimes, Criminologists and media scholars pointed out this double standard, noting that coverage often focused on the sisters' physical attractiveness rather than the socio-economic factors that contributed to their criminal behavior. Headlines like "Deadly Beauties" and "Killer Sisters' Reign of Terror" obscured the complex reality of their lives, the poverty, neglect, and lack of opportunity that formed the backdrop to their crimes. Today, Regina and Margaret DeFrancisco remain incarcerated in separate Illinois correctional facilities. Their appeals have been exhausted, their case now serving primarily as a case study for criminologists examining female juvenile offenders and the role of sibling influence in violent crime. While the DeFrancisco sisters' violence stemmed from calculated greed, our next case takes us across the Atlantic to England, where the Eriksson twins demonstrated how mental illness can create a deadly folie à deux, a shared madness that would play out in one of the most bizarre and disturbing public spectacles ever captured on film. Helsingborg, Sweden sits on the narrowest stretch of the Öresund Strait, where on clear days you can see Denmark across the water. It's a place of orderly streets, efficient public services, and the kind of social safety net that catches most people before they fall through society's cracks. This was the hometown of Ursula and Sabina Eriksson, identical twins born in 1967 to a Swedish mother and Swiss father, a seemingly unremarkable beginning for what would become one of the most bizarre cases in criminal psychology. Friends from their early years described the twins as unusually close, even by identical twin standards. They finished each other's sentences, dressed alike well into adulthood, and seemed to communicate through glances and gestures that others couldn't interpret. This intense bond, while appearing harmless in childhood, would later create the perfect conditions for a psychological phenomenon that few outside the psychiatric community had ever witnessed. In 2000, Ursula moved to the United States, while Sabina settled in Ireland with her partner and children. For years, they maintained separate lives while staying in close contact. Then in 2008, Ursula visited Sabina in Ireland, and something shifted in their dynamic. Neighbors reported overhearing intense conversations in Swedish, with both sisters becoming increasingly paranoid and isolated. Without warning, they abandoned Sabina's home, leaving her children with her partner, and boarded a ferry to Liverpool, England. It was as if they were running from something only they could see, Sabina's partner later told investigators. They kept saying people were after them, that they weren't safe anymore. What happened next was captured by traffic cameras, police body cams, and a BBC documentary crew that happened to be filming a series on highway patrol, creating one of the most disturbing and thoroughly documented cases of shared psychosis ever recorded. On May 17, 2008, the twins were traveling on a bus from Liverpool to London when they suddenly became agitated, claiming their fellow passengers were poisoning them with carbon monoxide. The driver, concerned by their erratic behavior, pulled over near the M6 motorway and asked them to disembark. As soon as their feet hit the pavement, both women bolted toward the busy highway. What followed defies rational explanation. Traffic cameras captured both sisters repeatedly running into the path of oncoming vehicles, traveling at 70 mph. Ursula was struck by a Volkswagen Polo, then immediately stood up and ran into the path of a massive 40-ton truck, sustaining catastrophic injuries, including compound fractures to both legs. Sabina, meanwhile, was hit by a Peugeot 406 at high speed, an impact that would kill most people instantly. Yet somehow she too rose to her feet, seemingly impervious to pain. When highway officers attempted to restrain her for her own safety, Sabina displayed what police described as superhuman strength, fighting off multiple officers while screaming that they were trying to steal her organs and extract her brain. It took 5 officers to finally subdue her, and even then she continued to struggle with such force that one officer suffered a broken rib. The BBC crew captured the entire surreal scene, broadcasting footage that would later be viewed millions of times online, footage so disturbing that many viewers initially believed it was staged or digitally manipulated. It wasn't. What they were witnessing was a rare psychiatric condition called folie à deux, a shared psychosis in which delusions are transmitted from one person to another. In folie à deux, the primary individual, usually the dominant personality, develops a delusional belief, which is then adopted by the secondary person through their close association, explained Dr. Leonard Davis, a psychiatrist who later studied the case. The Eriksson twins represent perhaps the most dramatic public manifestation of this condition ever documented. Remarkably, after being treated for minor injuries, Sabina was released from police custody the following day. Medical staff, unfamiliar with folie à deux and overwhelmed by more urgent cases, conducted only a cursory psychiatric evaluation. This catastrophic oversight would soon have deadly consequences. Disoriented and still in the grip of psychosis, Sabina wandered through Staffordshire towns for hours before encountering 54-year-old Glenn Hollinshead, a kind-hearted factory worker who noticed her distress and offered assistance. He invited her to his home, made her tea, and even offered her a place to stay for the night, an act of compassion that would cost him his life. Within hours of entering his home, Sabina, still gripped by paranoid delusions, grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed Glenn 5 times in the chest and abdomen. As he staggered outside, seeking help, calling out to neighbors that he had been stabbed, Sabina fled the scene. Glenn collapsed in his front yard and died from his wounds before paramedics could arrive. Sabina's flight from the murder scene was as bizarre as everything that had preceded it. Witnesses observed her striking herself in the head with a hammer, then leaping from a 40-foot bridge onto the A50 highway below. The fall, which should have been fatal, resulted only in a broken ankle and minor head injuries, another seemingly impossible survival that added to the case's surreal quality. I'm curious, what's the weather like where you are today? Drop a comment below. I'm always fascinated by how our global community experiences different conditions while watching the same content. Whether you're in sunshine or snow, I appreciate you being here as we explore this extraordinary case. When Sabina Eriksson finally appeared before Stafford Crown Court in 2009, the legal system faced an unprecedented challenge. How should justice address a crime committed during a psychotic episode so severe that the perpetrator had no rational understanding of her actions? Psychiatric evaluations confirmed that Sabina suffered from folie à deux with her sister Ursula, likely serving as the primary case who had transmitted her delusions to the more suggestible Sabina. If you're finding this case as fascinating and disturbing as I do, please consider supporting the channel by becoming a member. Members get early access to videos, exclusive content about cases too sensitive for the main channel, and direct input on which cases we cover next. Just click the join button below. Your support helps us continue bringing these important psychological analyses to light. The court ultimately accepted a plea of manslaughter on grounds of diminished responsibility. The judge, acknowledging the extraordinary psychiatric aspects of the case, imposed a 5-year hospital order with supervision under the Mental Health Act, noting that this is one of the most bizarre cases to come before the courts in many years. Ursula, meanwhile, remained hospitalized under secure psychiatric care in Sweden, having been transferred there after her physical injuries stabilized. The Eriksson case prompted significant reforms in emergency psychiatric protocols across the UK. Critics pointed out that had Sabina received proper psychiatric evaluation after the highway incident, Glenn Hollinshead would likely still be alive. The National Health Service revised its guidelines, mandating comprehensive mental health assessments before releasing individuals who display signs of acute psychosis, particularly those involved in unusual public incidents. Today, the case stands as a stark reminder of how mental illness can manifest in ways that defy conventional understanding. The footage of the twins on the M6 continues to circulate online, often presented without context as evidence of supernatural phenomena or conspiracy theories, a disservice to both the victims and to those who suffer from severe psychiatric conditions. While the Eriksson twins' violence stemmed from untreated mental illness, our next case takes us to Moscow, Russia, where 3 sisters endured years of unimaginable abuse before taking matters into their own hands, raising profound questions about self-defense, justice, and the failure of systems designed to protect the vulnerable. Moscow's northern district of Altufyevo rises in concrete uniformity, Soviet-era apartment blocks standing shoulder to shoulder like silent sentinels. In one such building, behind a nondescript door on the 9th floor, 3 sisters lived a life invisible to neighbors yet defined by terror. Christina, 19, Angelina, 18, and Maria, 17, Khachaturyan, shared a 3-room apartment with their father Mikhail, a 57-year-old former Soviet army officer whose military discipline had warped into sadistic tyranny. The Khachaturyan family appeared functional on paper. Mikhail maintained steady employment as a security consultant. The girls attended school regularly, though teachers noted their tendency to wear long sleeves even in warm weather. Their mother had left the household in 2015, citing Mikhail's controlling behavior and her own inability to protect her daughters. This departure left the sisters without their only buffer against their father's escalating abuse. He created a private dictatorship, a family friend later testified. Outside, he was charming, offering neighbors help, bringing gifts to teachers. Inside those walls, he was a monster. Mikhail's control was absolute and methodical. He installed cameras throughout the apartment to monitor his daughters' movements. He confiscated their phones, reading every message. He established elaborate rules. The floor had to be mopped 3 times daily. Dinner must be prepared precisely at 8 p.m. No one could use the bathroom without permission. Deviation from these rules triggered brutal punishment. The physical abuse followed a calculated pattern. Mikhail would summon one daughter to his room, force her to kneel, and beat her with a belt or metal rod, often while making her sisters watch. He favored strikes to the ribs and kidneys, areas where bruises wouldn't be visible in school. When Maria, the youngest, turned 12, he began sexually assaulting her, a horror he documented in photographs he threatened to share if she ever spoke out. The sisters kept meticulous records of their ordeal. In diaries hidden beneath floorboards, they detailed each beating, each humiliation. Text messages exchanged during rare moments of privacy revealed their desperation. "I can't take another day," Angelina wrote to Christina. "We need to tell someone." But when they attempted to seek help, systems failed them catastrophically. Twice, neighbors reported hearing screams to social services. Officials visited the apartment, but Mikhail, charming and prepared, showed them a spotless home and well-dressed daughters who, under his watchful eye, confirmed that everything was fine. School counselors noticed Maria's declining academic performance and withdrawn behavior, but attributed it to teenage adjustment issues. A teacher who suspected abuse was transferred to another school after Mikhail complained to administrators. "We were invisible," Christina later told investigators. "We screamed for help, but no one heard us." On July 27, 2018, Mikhail returned home following a psychiatric appointment. Sessions he attended not for treatment, but to obtain prescription tranquilizers he used to sedate the girls when he left the apartment. He had been drinking heavily and was in a particularly volatile mood. He summoned Maria to his room, where he berated her for leaving crumbs on the kitchen counter, sprayed pepper spray in her face, and threatened more severe punishment later. When he eventually fell asleep, the sisters exchanged glances that communicated what words couldn't. Years of shared suffering had created a silent language between them. They retrieved a hammer, a hunting knife, and a kitchen knife from hiding places they had prepared weeks earlier. At approximately 11:30 p.m., they entered their father's bedroom. The attack was swift and coordinated. Christina struck first, driving the hammer into Mikhail's temple to stun him. As he regained consciousness, Angelina stabbed him repeatedly in the chest and arms. Maria delivered the fatal wounds with the hunting knife, severing his carotid artery. Medical examiners would later count 36 stab wounds across his body. The entire attack lasted less than 2 minutes. Afterward, the sisters called emergency services themselves. When police arrived, they found the 3 young women sitting silently in the kitchen, blood-spattered but calm. "We killed our father," Angelina told the first officer on the scene. "He was going to kill us eventually, we just did it first." The case immediately ignited fierce debate across Russia, where domestic violence had been partially decriminalized just a year earlier. In 2017, Vladimir Putin had signed legislation reducing first-time domestic battery to an administrative rather than criminal offense. A move critics said sent a dangerous message about the value of women's safety in Russian society. Prosecutors initially charged all three sisters with premeditated murder, pointing to the hidden weapons and text messages, discussing their father's violence as evidence of planning. This characterization sparked outrage among women's rights activists, who organized demonstrations under the slogan "My хотели убивать," or "We didn't want to kill." Thousands gathered in Moscow's Pushkin Square, many holding signs reading, "Self-defense is not a crime," and "Who will protect us if the state won't?" The sisters' attorneys presented overwhelming evidence of Mikhail's abuse: medical records documenting old fractures and internal injuries, the sisters' diaries, photographs Mikhail had taken of the abuse, testimony from neighbors who had heard screams, and psychological evaluations showing all three sisters suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, consistent with prolonged torture. This was not murder, defense attorney Alexei Pashin argued. This was the desperate act of prisoners who saw no other escape. Public opinion strongly favored the sisters, with polls showing over 70% of Russians believed they should not face prison time. The case became a rallying point for domestic violence awareness in a country where, according to government statistics, 14,000 women die annually at the hands of current or former partners, a figure advocates say is significantly underreported. International human rights organizations, including Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, issued statements supporting the sisters, arguing that their actions constituted self-defense against years of documented torture. Legal experts from across Europe submitted amicus briefs, arguing that the case met international standards for self-defense against imminent harm. In July 2020, after 2 years of legal proceedings, the Moscow prosecutor's office reclassified the case. Recognizing the exceptional circumstances of prolonged abuse, they charged the sisters with the lesser offense of necessary self-defense resulting in death. The court acknowledged that the sisters had reasonably believed their lives were in immediate danger based on their father's pattern of escalating violence and explicit threats. Each sister received a 2.5-year suspended sentence with mandatory psychological counseling and community service, avoiding prison entirely. The verdict represented an unprecedented shift in Russian jurisprudence, effectively establishing that victims of sustained domestic abuse have the right to defend themselves, even lethally, when the state has failed to provide protection. This case forced our legal system to confront its own blindness, said Elena Sorokina, a prominent Russian legal analyst. These girls sought help through every legitimate channel before taking matters into their own hands. Their tragedy is that they were only taken seriously after becoming killers. The Khachaturyan case catalyzed significant legal reforms in Russia. In November 2020, the Russian parliament reintroduced comprehensive domestic violence legislation that had previously stalled. The new law expanded the definition of domestic violence to include psychological and economic abuse, created a simplified process for obtaining restraining orders, and established mandatory training for police officers responding to domestic incidents. For the sisters themselves, the legal victory brought little comfort. Psychological evaluations revealed profound trauma that would require years of therapy. Maria, now 20, continues to suffer from nightmares and panic attacks. Christina and Angelina have both been diagnosed with complex PTSD. All three remain in treatment, attempting to build lives defined by something other than victimhood or violence. "We didn't want to be killers," Angelina told reporters after the verdict. "We just wanted to be daughters who didn't live in fear." As we conclude our examination of these 4 cases, we're left with profound questions about family, violence, and the human capacity for both cruelty and survival. From the calculated brutality of the Whitehead twins to the desperate self-preservation of the Khachaturyan sisters, these stories reveal how the most intimate relationships can become battlegrounds, and how the bonds meant to protect us can sometimes become our greatest threat.